A storm is brewing in the heart of Texas, and a quiet rancher's wife is about to remind the world why she was once the CIA's most legendary operative. When ruthless thugs think they've found an easy target, they'll discover that some legends never fade, and some mistakes come with a deadly price. Subscribe now, because you won't want to miss what happens when they push her too far. The sprawling Double Creek Ranch sits like a sentinel against the harsh Texas landscape, its weathered fence posts and rusted gates telling stories of simpler times. For most folks passing by, it's just another cattle operation struggling against the relentless drought. But for Sarah Mitchell, it's more than that. It's her sanctuary, her escape from a past that most people couldn't begin to comprehend. The morning sun casts long shadows across the dusty yard as Sarah moves through her daily routine with practiced precision. Her boots leave familiar prints in the sun-baked earth as she makes her way to the stables, her movements fluid and purposeful despite her seemingly relaxed demeanor. To anyone watching, she's just another rancher's wife, her faded jeans and work-worn hands painting a picture of rural simplicity. But there's something else in the way she moves, something that doesn't quite fit the image she's cultivated so carefully. It's in the way her eyes constantly scan the horizon, the way she positions herself to always have a clear view of the approaching road. Old habits, buried deep beneath years of careful concealment, never really die. The ranch hands tip their hats when they see her, respect in their eyes, but not recognition. Not the kind that would come if they knew who she really was. They see only what she allows them to see. Emma Mitchell's widow, the woman who took over, running Double Creek after her husband's passing 3 years ago. They don't see the other Sarah, the one who spent 2 decades in the shadows, the operative whose name was once whispered in fear by America's enemies. As she checks the fence line, her mind drifts to the letter that arrived yesterday, unmarked, but heavy with meaning. Her former handler's words echo in her thoughts. They're moving again, Sarah. The network is active. Stay alert. She'd burned the letter immediately, muscle memory from years of training, but the warning lingered like smoke in still air. The ranch is quiet this morning, too quiet. The usual sounds of cattle and working men seem muted, distant. Sarah's fingers brush unconsciously against the small of her back, where a custom-made Sig Sauer P365 rests in its concealed holster. Another old habit, one she's never been able to break. The weapon's presence is as natural to her as breathing, though none of her ranch hands have ever suspected its existence. The drought has hit Double Creek hard, like every other ranch in the county. The land is parched, crying out for rain that refuses to come, but it's not the weather that has Sarah's instincts on high alert. There's something else, something in the air that reminds her of moments before operations would go hot, that familiar tension that preceded chaos. 3 black SUVs had passed by the ranch twice yesterday, moving slow, their tinted windows concealing their occupants. They weren't local. Sarah knows every vehicle within 50 miles. They weren't lost either. Their movements were too deliberate, too calculated. They were scouting, and Sarah recognized the pattern. She'd used it herself, countless times, in another life. As she works, her mind catalogues every detail of her surroundings with unconscious precision. The distance to the barn, 37 yards. The old tractor that could provide cover if needed. The loose board in the stable that conceals one of several cached weapons. Every angle, every approach, every potential threat and escape route. All processed and categorized by instincts honed through years of covert operations. The ranch hands see her as capable, but unthreatening. A widow doing her best to keep her husband's dream alive. They don't see how she tests the wind when she walks, how she manages to always have a clear line of sight to all approaches. They don't notice how she consistently positions herself with her back to solid walls, how her hands are always free, ready. Sarah pauses at the edge of the corral, watching a young horse test its limits against the fence. The animal's restlessness mirrors her own growing unease. Something is coming. She can feel it in her bones, the same way she used to sense trouble brewing in distant countries under assumed names. The question isn't if, but when. The sound of approaching vehicles draws her attention, and Sarah's body tenses imperceptibly. The same black SUVs from yesterday are approaching the ranch, kicking up dust on the access road. This time, they're not just passing by. Her mind shifts gears seamlessly, years of training surfacing like a shark in calm waters. Whatever comes next, Sarah Mitchell is ready. She may have left the CIA, but she never stopped being who she truly is, one of the most effective operatives the agency had ever produced. As the vehicles draw closer, Sarah maintains her casual posture, though her mind is already running through scenarios, counting exits, analyzing angles. The ranch hands continue their work, unaware that their quiet employer is preparing for what might become the most dangerous morning Double Creek Ranch has ever seen. The SUVs pull up to the main gate in a tight formation, dust billowing around their gleaming black exteriors. Sarah watches through narrowed eyes as 5 men emerge from the vehicles, their movements coordinated and purposeful. They're trying to look casual in their pressed jeans and expensive boots, but Sarah spots the telltale signs, the slight bulge of concealed weapons, the way they unconsciously maintain tactical spacing, the practiced sweep of their eyes across the property. These aren't ordinary thugs. Their leader, a tall man with silver-streaked hair and a custom leather jacket, steps forward. His smile is practiced, too perfect, like a mask worn to hide something darker beneath. "Mrs. Mitchell." His voice carries across the yard, smooth, as aged whiskey but with an edge that sets Sarah's nerves on high alert. "Name's Victor Kane. Hope you don't mind us dropping by unannounced." Sarah keeps her movements deliberately slow and steady as she approaches the gate, maintaining the persona of an unsuspecting rancher's wife. Her boots crunch against the gravel, each step carefully measured to keep optimal distance. "We don't get many visitors out here, Mr. Kane," she responds, her voice carrying just the right amount of polite wariness that any isolated rancher would show to unexpected guests. Kane's smile widens, but it doesn't reach his eyes. Those remain cold, calculating. "Well, we're here to discuss a business opportunity that could help with your current situation." He gestures vaguely at the drought-stricken land around them. 2 of his men have drifted to the sides, trying to be subtle about taking up flanking positions. Sarah notes their movements without appearing to notice, her peripheral vision tracking every shift in their stance. "My ranch isn't for sale," Sarah says firmly, her hand resting casually on the gate post. From this position, she can reach her concealed weapon in 1-3 seconds if needed. She can also see Tommy, one of her ranch hands, watching from the barn, his hand hovering near the shotgun she knows he keeps there. "Good boy." Kane's smile slips just a fraction. "Now, Mrs. Mitchell, let's not be hasty. Times are hard, and they're only going to get harder. We represent some investors who are very interested in this particular piece of land. They're prepared to make a very generous offer." The emphasis he places on "very generous" carries an unmistakable undertone of threat. Sarah recognizes the tactic. She's used it herself in past operations. Start with the carrot, then gradually introduce the stick. These men aren't here to negotiate. They're here to take what they want one way or another. The question is, why this land? Why now? "The ranch isn't for sale at any price," Sarah repeats, allowing a hint of steel to enter her voice. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to do." She turns slightly, a dismissal that she knows will provoke a response. It does. "Mrs. Mitchell," Kane's voice hardens, the pretense of friendliness evaporating like morning dew under the Texas sun. "I don't think you understand your position here. This isn't really a negotiation." One of his men steps forward, his hand resting obviously on his hip near his concealed weapon. It's meant to intimidate. Once in another life, Sarah would have found it almost amusing. Sarah turns back, her expression carefully neutral, even as her mind calculates angles, distances, potential weapons within reach. "I understand perfectly, Mr. Kane, but I don't think you do." She meets his gaze steadily, and for just a moment, something in her eyes makes him pause. It's gone before he can process it, replaced by the calm exterior of a simple rancher's wife. The tension in the air thickens as Kane's men move closer, their stances becoming more aggressive. The pretense of a friendly business visit is rapidly dissolving. Sarah can read it in their body language. They're not used to being refused, and they're preparing to show her the consequences of defiance. "Last chance, Mrs. Mitchell," Kane says, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl. "Take the offer, or things might get unfortunate." His men are now positioned in a loose semicircle, cutting off easy escape routes. They think they have her cornered, vulnerable. Their mistake. Sarah's mind flashes to the satellite photos, hidden in her study, the ones showing what's really beneath certain parts of her land, the ones explaining why these men are really here, why they won't take no for an answer. She pushes the thought aside, focusing on the immediate threat. "I think you should leave," she says quietly, her voice carrying across the suddenly silent yard. The ranch hands have stopped working, sensing the growing tension. They're watching now, hands drifting toward tools that could double as weapons. They're loyal, but Sarah knows she can't risk their lives. This is her fight. Kane takes a step forward, crossing an invisible line. "Nobody out here to help you, Mrs. Mitchell. Nobody to hear if things get rough. Why don't you be smart about this?" His men move with him, their confidence growing with each step. They think they see weakness in her stillness, in her calm. They don't recognize it for what it really is, the deadly calm of a predator assessing its prey. The morning sun beats down on the scene, the air thick with tension and unspoken threats. Sarah remains motionless, but her mind is racing, analyzing every detail, every possibility. She knows what's coming next. Men like this, they always follow the same pattern. First the threats, then the demonstration of force. She's seen it countless times, in countless countries, under countless different names. The question isn't whether violence is coming. It's when and how much force she'll need to use to end it quickly without revealing too much of who she really is. But as Kane's men spread out, their intentions becoming clearer with each passing. Second, Sarah realizes that maintaining her cover might soon become a luxury she can no longer afford. Kane's patience runs thin in the baking Texas heat as his men edge closer, their boots kicking up small clouds of dust. Sarah watches them, through half-lidded eyes, noting every subtle shift in their stance, every twitch of their hands toward concealed weapons. The smallest of them, a wiry man with a pockmarked face who Kane called Reeves, has his weight balanced wrong, favoring his right leg. The largest, a bull-necked enforcer in a black t-shirt, keeps his left arm slightly stiff. Old injuries, weak points. "Boys," Kane's voice cuts through the tense silence. "Why don't you show Mrs. Mitchell here what happens when people don't appreciate our generous offers?" He steps back, a conductor preparing to orchestrate his violent symphony. The men move forward with practiced coordination, their confidence evident in every step. They've done this before, many times. They're used to frightening lonely widows and stubborn ranchers into submission. The bull-necked man reaches for Sarah's arm, his meaty hand stretching out to grab her. "Time to teach you some manners, lady." His fingers never make contact. Sarah shifts her weight slightly, barely a whisper of movement, and somehow he finds himself grasping empty air. The moment of confusion on his face is almost comical. "Last warning," Sarah says softly, her voice carrying an authority that makes Kane pause despite himself. "Get back in your vehicles and leave my property." Her eyes remain focused on Kane, but her awareness encompasses every movement around her. The ranch hands have stopped pretending to work now, watching the scene unfold with growing tension. Reeves lets out a harsh laugh. "Or what, sweetheart? You'll call the sheriff." He steps closer, pulling a switchblade from his pocket with a theatrical flourish. "Nobody out here's going to hear you scream." The blade snaps open with a metallic click that seems to echo across the yard. Sarah doesn't respond to the threat. Her mind is cataloging everything, the distance to each man, the weapons they're carrying, the best way to end this without revealing too much of her capabilities. The ranch hands are too far away to get caught in the immediate conflict, but close enough to witness whatever happens. She'll need to be careful, maintain some illusion of plausible deniability. "You know," Kane calls out, his voice dripping with false concern, "accidents happen all the time on ranches, especially to stubborn widows who don't know when to take a good deal." He lights a cigarette, the flame from his lighter dancing in the morning air. Nobody would even question it. That's when Reeves makes his move, lunging forward with his knife. To the observers, what happens next seems impossible, a blur of motion too fast to follow. One moment Reeves is attacking, the next he's face down, in the dirt, his knife arm twisted behind him at an angle that makes the other men wince. Sarah hasn't even appeared to move from her spot. The bull-necked enforcer recovers from his surprise and charges forward with a roar. Sarah sidesteps his rush with fluid grace, her movements economical and precise. Her elbow finds a nerve cluster in his shoulder as he passes, and his left arm goes numb, dropping uselessly to his side. He stumbles, off balance, and a sweep of her boot sends him sprawling. Kane's cigarette drops from his lips as he watches. Two of his best men taken down in seconds by someone who couldn't be capable of such things. What the hell? His hand moves toward the gun hidden under his jacket, but Sarah's voice stops him. "I wouldn't." There's something different in her tone now, something that makes the remaining men freeze instinctively. It's not the voice of a rancher's widow anymore. It's the voice of someone who has commanded far more dangerous men in far more dangerous places. The other two men look to Kane for direction, their confidence shattered. The carefully orchestrated show of force has turned into something else entirely, something they don't understand. Sarah stands between their fallen companions, her posture relaxed, but her eyes sharp with lethal focus. "Who the hell are you?" Kane demands, his hand still hovering near his concealed weapon. The morning sun catches his face, highlighting the beads of sweat now rolling down his temples. It's not just from the heat anymore. Sarah's lips curve into a slight smile, but her eyes remain cold. "Just a rancher's widow, Mr. Kane. One who's telling you to leave." Her stance shifts subtly, and somehow the movement makes all the men take an involuntary step back. There's something familiar about it, something that triggers deep-seated warnings in their hindbrain. Reeves groans from his position in the dirt, trying to push himself up with his good arm. The bull-necked enforcer has managed to get to his knees, but his left arm still hangs useless at his side. Neither man seems eager to re-engage. Kane's face darkens with rage and humiliation. Nobody makes him look weak in front of his men. "You've just made a very big mistake, Mrs. Mitchell. Very big." But there's uncertainty in his voice now, a crack in his confident facade. Something about this situation has gone very wrong, but he can't quite put his finger on what. The remaining men look between Kane and Sarah, waiting for direction. The easy victory they'd expected has evaporated like morning mist, replaced by a growing sense that they've stumbled into something far more dangerous than they'd anticipated. The ranch hands watching from a distance murmur among themselves, but nobody moves to interfere. Something in Sarah's stance tells them this is her fight. The morning breeze carries the scent of dust and cattle across the yard, mixing with the metallic tang of adrenaline and fear. Kane's men help their fallen companions to their feet, their movements hesitant, wary. They're trying to understand what just happened, how a simple intimidation job went so wrong so quickly. Sarah hasn't moved, hasn't changed her relaxed posture, but something about her has shifted. The quiet rancher's widow seems to have evaporated, replaced by something else, something that makes hardened men step back without knowing why. It's in her eyes now, a cold calculation that speaks of experiences far beyond the Texas ranchlands. As Kane and his men regroup, their bravado shattered, but pride still stinging, Sarah's mind drifts momentarily to a dimly lit room in Kabul, 15 years ago. The same tension had filled the air then, the same pregnant pause before violence erupted. She had been someone else then, operating under a different name, pursuing a target who had similarly underestimated her carefully crafted cover. The memory surfaces with crystal clarity, the weight of her tactical gear hidden beneath traditional clothing, the soft whisper of wind through narrow streets, the moment when her quarry realized, too late, that the quiet aid worker was something else entirely. She remembers the shift in his eyes, the same dawning recognition she now sees creeping into Kane's gaze. "You moved too clean," Kane says suddenly, his voice low and thoughtful. "No random movements, no wasted energy." His hand has drifted, away from his weapon, but his posture remains tense. Military? He's fishing, trying to make sense of what he just witnessed. His men gather behind him, nursing their wounds and their wounded pride. Sarah doesn't answer, but her mind continues its rapid assessment. Kane's question reveals training of his own. He's not just some common thug. The way he stands, the way he processed her movements. Private military background, perhaps. That would explain the professional approach, the tactical positioning of his men. Memories surface unbidden, countless missions, different continents, various identities. Sarah had been many people over her 20 years with the agency. A humanitarian, worker in Afghanistan, a business consultant in Moscow, a teacher in Venezuela. Each identity had been crafted with meticulous care, every detail perfect. But her current identity, Sarah Mitchell, is different. It's not just another cover. It's the life she chose for herself, the life she shares with the memory of her late husband. "Look at how she reads distance," one of Kane's men mutters, the one who is hung back observing. "That's not something you learn on a ranch." His voice carries the weight of experience, and Sarah catalogs this new information. Another trained operator. This situation is becoming more complex by the moment. The ranch hands are still watching from a distance, and Sarah can sense their confusion. They've known her for 3 years, seen her work the land, handle the cattle, manage the books. The quiet, capable widow who took over her husband's dream. Now they're seeing something else, catching glimpses of another person beneath the familiar facade. Kane takes a step forward, but it's different now, cautious, measuring. "You know," he says, his voice carrying across the yard, "I've seen something like this before. Back in 07, Kandahar province." He watches her face carefully as he speaks. "There was this woman, never got her name, took down 4 of our best contractors before disappearing. Never knew who she was working for." Sarah keeps her expression neutral, but her mind races. Kandahar, 2007. The operation to disrupt a private military company that had gone rogue, selling intelligence to the highest bidder. She remembers the firefight, the 4 men who had tried to stop her from reaching their commander. They hadn't been killed, just neutralized. The agency didn't like unnecessary casualties. "Interesting story," Sarah replies, her voice giving away nothing, but she's already reassessing the situation. If Kane was in Kandahar during that operation, if he recognizes her style, this is about more than just the ranch. The pieces are starting to fall into place. The satellite photos, the sudden interest in her land, Kane's professional approach. The morning sun climbs higher, casting shorter shadows across the yard. A hawk circles overhead, its cry carrying across the ranch as it searches for prey. The symbolism isn't lost on Sarah. She can feel the weight of her concealed weapon against her back, comforting in its familiarity. 2 decades of muscle memory don't fade easily. "You know what I think," Kane continues, his earlier bravado replaced by something more dangerous: curiosity. "I think there's a lot more to you than a rancher's widow. I think you're someone else entirely." His men shift uneasily behind him, sensing the change in their leader's tone. They're no longer dealing with a simple intimidation job. Sarah's mind continues to work, analyzing this new development. If Kane was involved in Kandahar, if he recognizes her methods, then the interest in her ranch isn't coincidental. The satellite? Photos in her study, showing the hidden structures beneath her land, take on new significance. This isn't just about buying up distressed properties during a drought. Everyone's someone else entirely, Mr. Kane, she responds, allowing a hint of her other self to show through. The question is, who are you? Really? She watches his reaction carefully, noting the slight tension in his shoulders, the way his men respond to the shift in his posture. The standoff continues, but it's different now. The pretense of a simple business negotiation has evaporated like morning dew under the Texas sun. Both sides are reassessing, recalculating. Sarah can feel old instincts surfacing, combat-honed, reflexes awakening after years of careful suppression. She had hoped to leave that life behind, but some things never really let go. The wind carries the sound of cattle from the distant pastures, a mundane backdrop to the deadly dance unfolding. In the ranch yard, Sarah knows that whatever comes next will change everything. Her carefully constructed life, the peace she's found on this land, it's all balanced on a knife's edge. The tipping point comes without warning. One of Kane's men, the observer, the one who noticed her tactical movements, suddenly reaches for something in his jacket. Sarah registers the glint of metal, the distinct shape of a specialized communications device. Not a weapon, but in some ways more dangerous. He's calling for backup. Before his fingers can close around the device, Sarah moves. The calm facade drops completely, replaced by lethal efficiency. In 2 fluid steps, she closes the distance to the man, her hand striking a precise point on his wrist. The device clatters to the ground, and he finds himself on his knees, arm locked behind him in a hold that speaks of years of close-quarters combat training. "No calls," Sarah says quietly, but her voice carries an authority that freezes everyone in place. The ranch hands watching from a distance murmur in shock. This isn't the Sarah Mitchell they know, the woman who brings homemade pies to the county, fair and negotiates cattle prices with quiet determination. Kane's hand finally closes around his gun, drawing it with practiced speed. But Sarah is already moving, using his man as a shield, while simultaneously sweeping his legs out from under him. The unfortunate man crashes into Kane, disrupting his aim. The gun goes off, the shot going wide, startling the horses in the nearby corral. "Tommy!" Sarah calls out, her voice sharp with command. "Get everyone inside the barn, now!" Her longtime foreman hesitates for just a moment before acting, herding the other ranch hands to safety. She can trust Tommy. He was Emma's friend before she died, and he's shown nothing but loyalty since. The brief distraction costs her. The bull-necked enforcer, having recovered some use of his arm, charges her from the side. Sarah rolls with the impact, using his momentum against him. They hit the ground together, but she's already moving, her elbow finding the same nerve cluster as before. This time, she doesn't hold back. He drops, completely incapacitated. Kane steadies his weapon, but Sarah is no longer where she was. Years of CIA combat training take over. She flows like water around his aim, closing the distance before he can adjust. Her hand strikes his wrist at precisely the right angle, and the gun spins away into the dust. "You really were there?" Kane gasps, as she locks him in a hold that leaves him struggling for breath. "Kandahar, you're her, the ghost, the one they could never identify." There's a mix of fear and awe in his voice now. The other men hang back, suddenly unsure of themselves. Sarah's mind flashes to that mission. The weeks of preparation, the carefully constructed cover, the precise application of force when needed. She had been pursuing a rogue military contractor who was selling classified intelligence. The same contractor who had disappeared before she could complete her mission. "You worked for Hawthorne," she says quietly, the pieces finally clicking into place. The satellite photos, the hidden structures, Kane's interest in her land, it all connects. He's still active, isn't he? Still selling secrets? Kane's silence is all the confirmation she needs. James Hawthorne, the contractor who had slipped through her fingers in Kandahar, leaving 4 of his men behind as he vanished into the maze-like streets. The mission that had haunted her, the one loose end, she'd never been able to tie up. The morning sun beats down on the scene. Kane immobilized, his men scattered or incapacitated, the ranch hands watching in stunned silence from the barn. Sarah's mind races through the implications. If Hawthorne is involved, if he's operating in this area, then her quiet retirement just became much more complicated. You should have done your research better, Sarah tells Kane, her voice cold with professional disappointment. Should have looked deeper into who owns this land. Might have saved you some trouble. She adjusts her hold slightly, making him wince. Now, we're going to have a conversation about exactly what Hawthorne is planning. The remaining men look at each other uncertainly. Their leader is subdued, their tough guys are down, and the simple intimidation job has turned into something far beyond their experience. The quiet rancher's widow has transformed into someone else entirely. Someone dangerous, someone with skills that speak of serious government training. Sarah can see the calculation in their eyes, the moment they realize just how badly they've miscalculated. But there's something else too. A growing recognition that they're now caught between 2 dangerous forces. Their loyalty to Hawthorne, whatever its source, is being weighed against the very real and immediate threat before them. "He'll kill us if we talk," one of them says, fear evident in his voice. "You don't know what he's capable of." A cold smile crosses Sarah's face, one that makes them step back instinctively. "I know exactly what he's capable of. I spent 6 months tracking him across 3 continents. The question is, do you know what I'm capable of?" The warning in her voice is clear, and she feels Kane tense in her hold. The yard falls silent except for the distant sound of cattle and the nervous shuffling of horses in the corral. The morning that started with a simple show of force has evolved into something far more complex. Sarah's carefully maintained cover might be compromised, but in its place stands something else, a legend that even hardened mercenaries speak of in whispers. Sarah's phone buzzes in her pocket, a specific vibration pattern she hasn't felt in years, the secure line, the one she thought she'd never need again. Without loosening her hold on Kane, she retrieves it with her free hand. Only one person would be calling that number. "I was wondering when you'd check in, Jackson," she answers, her voice carrying the weight of years of shared history. Director Thomas Jackson, her former handler, the man who had overseen her most critical missions. "They found you faster than we expected." Jackson's voice crackles through the encrypted line. "Hawthorne's been busy, Sarah. He's built something. Bigger than what we saw in Kandahar. We've been tracking unusual communications, massive data transfers. Whatever he's planning, it's happening soon." Kane stiffens at the mention of Hawthorne's name, and Sarah tightens her hold slightly. "You knew they were coming," she says to Jackson, pieces falling into place. "The satellite photos I've been receiving weren't just routine updates, were they?" "No," Jackson admits. "We've had intel for months suggesting Hawthorne was setting up a major operation in your area. The structures under your land, they're part of an old government communications network. Cold War era. Hawthorne wants to use them to tap into classified channels, sell information to the highest bidder." Sarah's mind races through the implications. The drought, the sudden interest in buying up local ranches, Kane's professional approach. It was all part of a larger strategy. How deep does this go? "Deep enough that we can't move officially," Jackson replies. "Hawthorne's got people in positions of influence. Any conventional operation would be compromised before it began. That's why we need you, Sarah. You're already in position, and more importantly, you're officially retired. No official connections." The irony doesn't escape her. 3 years of building a new life, of trying to leave her past behind, only to have it catch up in the most dramatic way possible. She looks at Kane, sees the recognition in his eyes. He's hearing only her side of the conversation. but it's enough to confirm his worst fears about who she really is. Hawthorne's different now. Kane speaks up suddenly, his voice strained against her hold. He's not just selling secrets anymore. He's building something bigger, a network that can access anything, anywhere. The ranch. It's not just about the old comm structures. There's something else here, something even my team doesn't know about. Sarah processes this information, her training automatically analyzing Kane's tone, his body language, looking for signs of deception. He's telling the truth, or at least what he believes to be the truth. Jackson, she says into the phone, Kane's team here isn't just a regular intimidation squad. They're former military contractors, probably ex-special forces. Hawthorne's not taking any chances. That fits with what we're seeing, Jackson confirms. He's recruiting heavily, bringing in serious operators. Whatever he's planning, he's expecting resistance. Sarah, we need you back in. Officially or unofficially, whatever you're comfortable with. But we need your skills, your experience. You're the only one who ever got close to catching him. The weight of the moment settles over Sarah. In the distance, she can see Tommy and the other ranch hands watching from the barn, their worldview irrevocably altered by what they've witnessed. Her careful construction of Sarah Mitchell, rancher's widow, has cracked, revealing glimpses of who she used to be, who she still is, beneath the surface. "What's your team's orders, Kane?" she demands, adjusting her hold to emphasize the question. The full truth now. "Whatever loyalty you think you owe Hawthorne, trust me, he won't show you the same consideration." Kane hesitates, but the fight has gone out of him. Primary objective was securing the ranch, by any means necessary. Secondary was to assess the level of resistance we'd encounter. There's a larger team coming, heavy hitters. They're not going to ask nicely. "How long?" Sarah's voice is sharp, professional. "Tonight," Kane admits. "Full tactical team. They've been waiting for our signal. When we don't check in." He leaves the implication hanging. Sarah returns her attention to the phone. "You get all that, Jackson?" "Every word," he confirms. "Sarah, this is bigger than we thought. If Hawthorne's moving this aggressively, he must be close to implementing whatever he's planning. We can have a team to you in 12 hours, but that'll be too late," Sarah finishes. "They'll be here before then." Her mind is already shifting gears, falling back into operational planning mode. The ranch's layout, defensive positions, available resources, everything takes on new significance. "You don't have to do this alone," Jackson says, concern evident in his voice. "We can try to expedite the response team." Sarah looks around her ranch, her home, the place where she'd found peace after years in the shadows. Now it's about to become a battlefield. "I won't be alone," she says finally. "I've got some good people here. And more importantly," she allows herself a small, dangerous smile. "I've got home field advantage." The transformation completes itself in a heartbeat. Sarah releases Kane with a precise movement that leaves him gasping in the dust, knowing he won't try anything, not now that he understands who he's dealing with. The quiet rancher's widow vanishes entirely, replaced by the operative who had once tracked Hawthorne across 3 continents, who had earned a reputation that made hardened mercenaries check their shadows. "Tommy!" she calls out, her voice carrying the unmistakable tone of command. "Get over here! Bring Mike and Carlos!" Her longtime foreman hurries over, followed by her 2 most experienced ranch hands. They move cautiously, still processing the scene they've witnessed. "Mrs. Mitchell," Tommy starts, then stops, clearly unsure how to continue. The woman before him isn't the same person who shared coffee with him just this morning, discussing cattle prices and feed supplies. "The truth, Tommy," Sarah says, her voice softening slightly. "I owe you that much. I'm not just Emma's widow. Before I met her, before all this, I worked for people who protect this country. People who stop men like these from selling our secrets to enemies who'd use them against us." Tommy's weathered face shows a mix of emotions, Surprise, uncertainty, but mostly understanding. That's why you always seemed different. Why you noticed things others missed. He straightens up, determination replacing confusion. What do you need us to do? Sarah's response is immediate, tactical. We've got until nightfall before they come in force. Mike, I need you to get the horses moved to the back pasture, far from any potential fighting. Carlos, start moving the cattle to the lower field. Tommy, you know where Emma kept the guns? Guns safe in the study. Tommy nods. She always said a ranch needs protection from more than just coyotes. A hint of a smile crosses his face. Guess she knew more than she let on to. She knew everything, Sarah confirms, allowing herself a moment of remembrance. She was my extraction point after Kandahar, helped me disappear, gave me a new life. Then we fell in love, and this place became more than just a cover. Kane watches this exchange from his position on the ground, his professional assessment continuing despite his situation. Your ranch hands, he says slowly. They're not just cowboys, are they? Sarah's smile is cold. Emma was thorough. Tommy's ex-Army Rangers. Mike did 3 tours with Force Recon. Carlos was a combat engineer. We attract a certain type here. She turns to her men. Time to put those skills back to work, gentlemen. The ranch hands, her operators now, snap into action with practiced efficiency. Years of civilian life fall away as military training resurfaces. They move with purpose, their earlier confusion replaced by professional focus. What about us? Kane asks, gesturing to his battered team. You know we can't stop what's coming. Hawthorne's people will be here by nightfall. Sarah studies them for a moment, her mind working through scenarios. You've got a choice to make. Hawthorne's not the kind to forgive failure. Stay here, help us, and maybe you get a chance to come out of this clean. Fight against us. She leaves the threat unspoken. The men exchange glances. The bull-necked enforcer, still nursing his deadened arm, speaks first. Lady, I've seen what happens to people who cross Hawthorne, but I've also heard stories about you. The ghost who couldn't be caught, couldn't be killed. The one who got closest to taking him down. He struggles to his feet. I like odds I can calculate. Right now, those odds are with you. One by one, Kane's men nod their agreement. They're professionals, after all. They can recognize when the tactical situation has shifted. Kane himself stands slowly, dusting off his clothes. For what it's worth, he says, I never liked Hawthorne. Man's a zealot, thinks he's some kind of crusader. The money was good, but he shrugs. Better to be on the winning side. Sarah's phone buzzes again, another message from Jackson. She reads it quickly, her expression hardening. Satellite shows vehicles mobilizing at a compound 30 miles east. Heavy equipment, tactical gear. They're not waiting for nightfall. They're coming now. The ranch suddenly erupts into controlled activity. Tommy emerges from the house with an armful of weapons, hunting rifles, shotguns, and a few pieces that definitely aren't standard ranch equipment. Carlos and Mike return from their tasks, already discussing defensive positions and fields of fire. Sarah moves to the center of the yard, the morning sun casting her shadow long across the packed earth. She's fully in her element now, the years of command experience flooding back. We've got 4 hours, maybe less. These aren't ordinary mercenaries coming for us. They're skilled, well-equipped, and they won't hesitate to use lethal force. She turns to Kane. I need everything you know about their tactical approach. Numbers, equipment, preferred strategies. Then to her ranch hands. We're going to turn this place into a killing field. Every advantage we've got, we're going to use it. This is our home, and they're about to learn why you don't threaten someone on their own ground. The wind picks up, carrying the scent of dust and sage across the ranch. Storm clouds gather on the horizon, a rare sight in the drought-stricken land. Sarah allows herself a grim smile. The coming storm seems fitting. After all, She's about to remind the world why she was once the CIA's most legendary operative, and why some ghosts are better left undisturbed. Sarah moves through the ranch with lethal grace, her mind shifting fully into operational mode. The layout she's known for years transforms in her tactical vision. The barn becomes a defensible position with multiple exit points. The old grain silo offers perfect elevation for a sniper's nest, and the scattered farm equipment provides natural cover zones. They'll come in 3 teams, Kane explains as they fortify positions. Standard tactical approach, 1 main force up the center, 2 flanking units trying to pin us down. They'll have at least 1 designated marksman, probably set up on that ridge to the east. He points to the elevated position overlooking the ranch. Not if we get there first, Sarah responds, her mind already formulating counter-strategies. Mike, that ridge is yours. Your force recon experience makes you our best shot. Take the 308 from Emma's gun safe. You'll find it's been modified. A ghost of a smile crosses her face. My wife always did like to be prepared. Mike nods, understanding dawning in his eyes as he checks the weapon. The rifle has been professionally customized, match-grade barrel, enhanced trigger mechanism, advanced optics, not standard ranch equipment by any measure. Carlos, Sarah continues, I need those engineering skills. We've got 4 hours to turn this place into a nightmare for anyone trying to breach it. Use whatever you need, farm equipment, vehicles, explosives from the demolition shed. Demolition shed? Kane interrupts, surprised. What kind of ranch is this? The kind built by someone who understood the world we live in, Sarah answers simply. Emma didn't just help me disappear. She created a fortress disguised as a farm. Everything here serves 2 purposes. The next hours pass in a blur of focused activity. Carlos rigs the access roads with improvised explosive devices, cleverly concealed beneath loose dirt. Tommy and 2 of Kane's men transform the barn into a hardened position, creating firing ports and fallback points. The remaining hands strategically position vehicles and equipment to channel any attacking force into predetermined kill zones. Sarah moves between positions, adjusting, advising, her years of tactical experience shaping every decision. Her phone buzzes occasionally with updates from Jackson. Satellite imagery showing the approaching force, intelligence about their capabilities, confirmation that official help is still hours away. 12 vehicles spotted, she announces after one such update. Heavy weapons, professional gear. They're not trying to be subtle anymore. She turns to Kane. Your former colleagues aren't holding back. Kane checks his borrowed weapon, his face grim. Hawthorne never does, not when he's cornered. Whatever he's got hidden under this ranch, it's big enough to make him risk everything to get it. Sarah's hand unconsciously touches the small of her back, feeling the familiar weight of her Sig Sauer. He still remembers Kandahar, she says quietly. Remembers how close I came to ending his operation. He won't underestimate me this time. The storm clouds have moved closer, darkening the sky and bringing the promise of rain, the first in months. Thunder rolls in the distance as Sarah completes her final inspection of their defenses. The ranch has been transformed into a carefully crafted killing ground. Every approach covered, every advantage maximized. Mike's voice crackles over the radio from his sniper position on the ridge. Movement on the eastern approach. 3 vehicles. Heavy armor. They're setting up a forward position. Sarah moves to the barn's upper level, using high-powered binoculars to study the enemy deployment. Their approach is professional, methodical, exactly what she'd expect from Hawthorne's people. But there's something in their positioning that catches her attention. They're avoiding the north access road completely, she observes. Kane, what aren't you telling me about their tactical plan? Kane hesitates, then sighs. There's a second team, smaller, more elite. They'll come in through the old creek bed, to the north while the main force draws our attention. It's Hawthorne's favorite play, hammer and anvil. Instead of anger at this withheld information, Sarah smiles. Good. That's exactly what I was hoping for. She turns to Tommy. Remember that ravine we sealed off last spring? The one that connects to the creek bed? Tommy's eyes widen in understanding. The steel plates we buried, the ones that seemed like overkill at the time. You were preparing for something like this all along. Emma and I both were, Sarah confirms. Everything about this ranch, every modification, every hidden defense. It was all designed for a day like today. She checks her watch. Their main force will hit us in 30 minutes, trying to keep us focused on them. The northern team will come in 15 minutes after that, expecting to catch us in a crossfire. She gathers her defenders, their faces illuminated by the stormy light filtering through the barn's windows. This is going to get very bad, very quickly. These men are professionals, and they won't hesitate to kill any of us. But we have what they don't. We know this land, we've prepared for this, and we're fighting for our home. Thunder crashes closer now, and the first drops of rain begin to fall, pattering on the roof above them. Sarah feels the familiar calm settling over her, the focused clarity that always came before combat. She is no longer the quiet rancher's widow. She is what she has always been, a predator, a ghost, a legend that even hardened operators speak of in whispers. "Take your positions," she commands, her voice carrying the weight of decades of experience. "Let's remind Hawthorne why he spent all these years looking over his shoulder. Let's show him why you don't threaten someone on their own ground." The defenders move to their assigned positions as the storm breaks overhead. The drought-stricken earth drinks in the rain, and Sarah knows that soon it will drink in something else. The quiet life she's built here might be ending, but she's about to show them all why some legends never die. The first shots come with the lightning, the flash and thunder masking the initial exchange of fire. Sarah moves like a shadow through the barn's upper level, her movements precise and economical as she tracks the approaching vehicles through her rifle scope. The rain has intensified, turning the ranch yard into a muddy battlefield. "Contact, east perimeter," Mike's calm voice reports over the radio. Three-man team trying to flank around the equipment shed, taking the shot. His rifle cracks twice, and two of the shadows moving through the rain disappear. The third dives for cover behind an old tractor. The main force hits hard, exactly as Kane predicted. Armored vehicles breach the outer gate, their engines roaring as they push through the rain toward the ranch house. But Sarah's prepared defenses turn their aggressive approach against them. The first vehicle hits Carlos's, buried explosives flipping onto its side in a spray of mud and shrapnel. "South team engage," Sarah commands. Tommy and his group open fire from concealed positions, their coordinated shots forcing the attacking force to deploy defensively. The ranch hands' military training shows their fire is disciplined, professional, keeping the attackers pinned, while conserving ammunition. Kane proves his worth, calling out enemy positions and tactics from his position beside Sarah. "Watch the tree line," he warns. "They'll have a demo team working their way." There. His borrowed rifle barks, and an explosion lights up the rainy darkness as a satchel charge detonates prematurely in its carrier's hands. Sarah's mind processes everything with cold efficiency. The attack is well coordinated but predictable, exactly what she'd expect from Hawthorne's playbook. "Time for the northern team," she murmurs, checking her watch. Right on cue, movement appears in the creek bed. "Carlos, North Ravine," she speaks into her radio. The former combat engineer responds with 2 clicks, and seconds later the ground beneath the flanking team erupts. The buried steel plates, activated by remote charges, snap upward like massive steel jaws, catching the elite team in a devastating trap. But Hawthorne's men are professionals. They adapt quickly, shifting their attack pattern, probing for weaknesses. A burst of concentrated fire forces Mike to abandon his sniper position on the ridge. "They've got thermal," he reports, falling back to his secondary position. "High-end gear." "Acknowledged," Sarah responds, already moving. She flows through the shadows of the barn, her movements ghost-like, muscle memory from countless operations guiding her steps. The rain works to her advantage now, reducing visibility, masking sounds. 3 attackers breach the barn's lower level, moving in a tight formation. They're good. Their movements coordinated, their sectors of fire perfectly covered. But Sarah is better. She drops from above like a predator, decades of close-quarters combat training, unleashed in a blur of lethal efficiency. The first man goes down before he can raise his weapon, a precise strike to his throat crushing his windpipe. The second manages to turn, but Sarah is already inside his guard, her knife finding the gap in his body armor. The third gets off a burst of fire, but she's no longer there, having rolled behind a support beam. His momentary confusion costs him everything as Sarah's garrote wire ends his fight silently. "Barn clear," she reports, retrieving her knife, but there's no time to catch her breath. The main force is pressing hard now, using the distraction to push closer to the ranch house. "They're after something specific," Kane calls out, his voice barely audible over the gunfire and rain. "This isn't just about taking the ranch anymore. Hawthorne must have found something in those satellite scans, something worth all this." Sarah's mind races, connecting dots. The old communication bunkers beneath the ranch, the Cold War-era installation that had drawn Emma here in the first place. The command center, she realizes. There's a hardened facility under the main house. Emma never told me exactly what was down there, but her thought is interrupted by a massive explosion that rocks the entire ranch. The attackers have breached the house's outer defenses with shaped charges, blowing a hole in the reinforced walls. "All units, fall back to secondary positions," Sarah commands, her voice steady despite the chaos. "Carlos, initiate Protocol Delta." The engineer acknowledges, and moments later, selected sections of the ranch yard erupt in controlled detonations, creating a barrier of flame and debris that forces the attacking force to cluster together. Sarah moves through the rain toward the house, her Sig Sauer ready. The peace she's found here, the quiet life she's built, it's all being stripped away by fire and violence. But underneath the rancher's widow, beneath the careful facade she's maintained for years, something else is emerging, something that makes hardened killers step back in fear. "You should have stayed away, Hawthorne," she whispers to herself as she approaches the breached wall. "You should have remembered what happened last time." Lightning flashes again, illuminating her advance through the rain and smoke. The legend that Hawthorne's men whispered about, the ghost that haunted their nightmares. She's no longer hiding. The ranch house, her home for the past 3 years, has become a war zone. But Sarah moves through it with deadly purpose, every step calculated, every movement precise. The time for playing defense is over. Now she's going to remind them all why some operatives become legends, and why some legends are best left undisturbed. "Found something," Sarah's radio crackles with Tommy's voice. "Hidden elevator shaft in the study, behind the bookcase. They're trying to breach it. Heavy equipment, cutting tools." The sound of gunfire punctuates his report, followed by the sharp crack of return fire. Sarah moves through the smoke-filled corridors of her home, every sense alert. The rain pounds against the broken windows, creating a constant background roar. Her boots crunch over broken glass and spent shell casings as she approaches the study, keeping to the shadows. "Clever, Emma," she whispers to herself. 3 years of living in this house, and she'd never known about the elevator. Her wife had kept some secrets, even from her. But then again, they both had. It had been part of what drew them together, the understanding that some things were better left unspoken. Through the study doorway, she catches glimpses of movement. 4 men, working on what appears to be an ordinary bookcase. But Sarah can see now what she'd missed before. The subtle reinforcement in the wall, the almost invisible seams that marked a concealed entrance. Their cutting equipment sends sparks flying as they work to breach the hidden door. "Status report," she whispers into her radio. The responses come quickly. "South perimeter holding." "Cease, Carlos. East side clear. 2 tangos down. Mike, west approach secured. Kane, North team neutralized. Tommy. The attacking force has been whittled down, but these men in the study, they're different. Their gear is more advanced. Their movements more precise. These are Hawthorne's elite, the ones he saves for the most critical missions. A new voice cuts through her radio, encoded but familiar. Sarah, satellite shows a second wave incoming. Jackson's tension is evident, even through the secure line. Heavy vehicles, at least 20 more operators. 10 minutes out. Sarah's mind races through options, calculating angles and possibilities. Whatever's hidden beneath her ranch, it's important enough for Hawthorne to commit everything he has. The rain continues to pour outside, lightning illuminating the chaos. In bright flashes, she checks her ammunition. 3 magazines for the Sig Sauer, plus what's loaded. The knife at her ankle, the garrote wire in her sleeve. More importantly, she has what these men don't. Intimate knowledge of every inch of this house, and the kind of training that turns ordinary objects into weapons. The men at the bookcase make progress, the hidden door finally yielding to their tools. Behind it, gleaming metal doors confirm Tommy's report. An elevator, military grade, leading down to whatever Emma had helped hide here. Sarah touches her radio once more. All units, fall back to the house. Protocol Omega. She hears the acknowledgements, knows her people understand. It's their final contingency plan, the one Emma had insisted they prepare but never thought they'd need. Time slows as Sarah makes her move. The first man dies silently, her garrote wire finding his throat before he can cry out. The second turns at the sound of his colleague's dropped equipment, but Sarah is already moving. Her knife takes him in. The kidney, a precise strike that bypasses his body armor. The third manages to bring his weapon up, but Sarah is inside his guard. She strips the rifle from his hands with a technique learned in a dark room in Moscow 15 years ago. The stock of his own weapon crushes his throat before he can shout a warning. The fourth man, clearly the leader, is good. He reacts instantly, his knife appearing in his hand as he drops into a fighting stance. The ghost, he says, recognition in his eyes. Hawthorne said you might be here. Did he tell you what happened to the last team he sent after me? Sarah's voice is cold, professional. She circles slowly, noting his position relative to the elevator doors. The man smiles, but it doesn't reach his eyes. Kandahar, but that was a long time ago. You've been playing rancher, getting soft. We're not the same kind of operator anymore. Sarah's response is movement. She flows forward like water, her attacks coming from impossible angles. The man is good, very good. He blocks her first strike, counters with a slash that would have opened her throat if she were where he expected. But Sarah hasn't spent the last 3 years just running a ranch. They dance through the study, their combat a lethal ballet of strikes and counters. He draws blood with a lucky slash to her arm. She breaks 3 of his fingers in return. The fight is brutal, efficient, the kind of close-quarters combat that most people never see. You've got no idea what's really here, do you? The man gasps as they grapple. What Hawthorne's really after? This isn't about some old communications bunker. Sarah drives her knee into his solar plexus, following up with an elbow strike that cracks his orbital bone. Then enlighten me, she says, but he's already slipping into unconsciousness. The elevator doors slide open with a soft chime that seems absurdly peaceful amid the destruction. Sarah can hear gunfire outside as her people engage the second wave of attackers. Whatever's hidden below, whatever Emma helped conceal here, she's out of time to wonder about it. As she steps into the elevator, her radio crackles one final time. Sarah, Jackson's voice is urgent now. Satellite shows. My God. You need to see this. The entire underground complex, it's massive. Much bigger than anything we thought was there. Emma wasn't just hiding you. She was hiding something else. Something big enough to make Hawthorne risk everything. Lightning flashes through the broken windows as Sarah presses the down button. Then let's find out what my wife thought was worth dying to protect. The doors slide closed as thunder shakes the house above, and Sarah Mitchell descends into the depths of her own property, toward answers she never knew she was living above.